All right, this is Steve with Macro and Cheese, another trip down labor lane, folks. We have a situation where we've been trying to present to you the new face of labor, labor fighting back, labor taking its democratically owned roots and working together to build power internally and externally and big picture, building power across the nation, across industry, you name it. And today is not going to be any different than that, because what we're experiencing now in this episode is when big old labor, the old school way of doing things, tries to fight back the counter revolution to the new revolution. And what we're watching is, hey, you didn't vote well enough, because if you had, you would have gotten the results we want. So, guys, the vote you did before, we're going to scrap that. And we're going to go ahead and postpone another vote to make sure that maybe we get the results we want as the old guard. And here to talk to me about this today is Traven Leyshon. He's been active in the labor movement as a labor socialist for more than 5 decades. He's currently the president of the Green Mountain Central Labor Council, part of the leadership team of the Vermont State Labour Council, AFL-CIO, member of the OPEIU 153, formerly active as a Teamster truck driver for the Teamsters for a Democratic Union, and as a rank and file UAW audit worker. I'm so happy to have you with me today, sir. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thanks for giving us the opportunity to get our message out.
Well, indeed, this right here is near and dear to my heart, because we are trying to find any and all ways to basically bring back labor, to give ourselves a chance. And in this neoliberal order, labor has been pretty much choked to death. It's nice to see a resurgence, and it's nice to see the Vermont AFL-CIO doing more than pay lip service to it. You're living it, you're doing it, but you're not up against just a bunch of powder puffs. You're up against the big national. You're up against folks that don't want to see new faces and new voices and new ideas and new power arrangements. Tell me a little bit about your struggle.
I've been part of the Vermont State Labour Council since, 1997 myself. I'm kind of a holdover from a period where, frankly, most union members didn't even know that we existed as a Vermont AFL-CIO, didn't know there was a state federation. And we were maybe almost beyond life support for at least 2 decades. Like the rest of the labor movement nationally, we were stagnating, while I guess nationally the organized labor movement was shrinking, which is not a new phenomenon. I mean, I grew up in a union family, and in the early 1950s, we represented maybe 35% of people who worked, working class folks. Today, nationally, I believe the numbers are down to about 10%. And in the private sector, that's even smaller. Since 2019, things have really changed, however, in Vermont. So while the old labor movement, most of it has been stagnating or declining, we've actually grown rapidly. And that's in part a result of a new leadership. But that new leadership didn't come out of anywhere. It came out of union members who had their expectations raised, who began to see labor movement not just holding a union card and expecting that the union would be there as some insurance agency to protect you when something unfair happened, but actually building a labor movement. And one of the slogans that we look to is putting the movement back in the labor movement. And we also have a profound understanding that democracy is power, that developing a member-run, member-directed labor movement is essential, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the only way to really build power. And that's what, living in capitalist America, that's what you need. Otherwise, you're suppressed and you become demoralized, and you see a working class which increasingly doesn't even know that it's a working class, but is divided. And our goal is to develop an ethos of participatory democracy and to help working class people have a sense of self-activity, that what they do matters, what they do collectively matters in particular. In 2019, there was a revolution. We had our first large convention. We have conventions every year, but we only elect a new leadership in the Vermont AFL-CIO every 2 years. We had our first large convention that rank and file members came to. And they were activated, particularly coming out of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And this was a new face. And at that convention, a new leadership was elected. Some of this is captured in the book. I know you interviewed David Van Dusen, who was elected top officer at that meeting, but it was really a leadership team that was elected. It wasn't just about one or two individuals. It was people who had a different vision of building a labor movement that wasn't top down, that was bottom up, that would welcome and seek to involve members. And everything began to change in 2019 here.
Can you tell me what your idea of a participatory democracy is within a union space so that people that maybe are so far afield of what a union even is might have an understanding of how that operates?
Well, let me contrast two models. One is the dominant business unionism model, which has dominated the labor movement in this country for many, if not most unions since at least the late 1940s, 50s. And the result is that a lot of people who are union members, they pay their dues. They don't know what union they belong to. Their children, their family members just know that someone's paying dues to the union, kind of like you would pay money to an insurance company to take care of you in an event that something happens. While that's actually better, it's better to be a member of a union that's top down than not be a member of a union at all. The results have been pretty bad. There's been a corporate offensive in this country that's been highly successful, especially since the mid-1970s, in weakening workers' power. Along with that, there's been a certain level of demoralization and disengagement from believing in a social contract, believing that what we do together matters, which is why we now have phenomena like the growth of the far right, demagogically taking advantage of that situation. Our understanding, and it's not new to us, I mean, it's been there since the 1800s as an alternative. It's about bringing people together in activity, standing up to the boss, standing up to politicians who don't have our interests in mind. And in fact, I mean, in this country, we're really stuck with two parties, a two-party system, which are both dominated by corporate money, by the rich. And we don't have a workers' party or an independent party in this country, which is actually a task, in my view, that's going to be absolutely necessary to turn things around. But in order to get there, you have to have millions of working class people believe that what they do together can make a change, can make things better, not only for themselves and their families, but for working people in general. Some people refer to that as social movement unionism or bargaining for the common good. It's all about changing the union movement into a member-driven union movement. And concretely, what that meant for us, well, first of all, bringing rank-and-file members to a convention where they elected a new leadership on the basis of a program which was progressive, big-picture program, and then continuing to involve members in every way possible. Through communications, our executive board meetings are open to any union member with voice, no vote. But, voice is important. That's something that a lot of union members never felt they had before. There was a bureaucracy up there that would, Lord knows what they were going to do. You pay dues to them, and they often have a privileged status, hobnob with mostly Democratic politicians, but the powerful from another class in Washington, D.C. And instead, we put our emphasis on the actual activity and helping working people develop their own self-confidence and developing a greater sense of unity, that we are a working class, that we are a trade union movement that can actually build power. And instead of everything going in the wrong direction, as it has, particularly since the mid-1970s, we can deal with big issues like climate change and the vast, rich versus everyone else situation that's really dominated the political culture in this country.
So you guys are in the middle of some stuff right now. I mean, right here, right now. Tell us about this struggle. What's going on there?
Well, this is a struggle that's been going on for, well over 100 years as to whether or not you have a privileged labor bureaucracy that maybe might be making $300,000, $500,000 a year and plus perks, total healthcare coverage.
Jeez.
And they're supposedly representing members, some of whom aren't even earning a livable wage, a family wage.
You internally are dealing with I don't know how to categorize it other than an attack on your democratically elected slate by your national AFL-CIO. There's a recent article that came out in Counterpunch that basically said your internal uh, democracy, if you will, that you guys elected a slate. The national is basically saying, no, you got to keep voting. We don't like the results of your vote.
Right.
No?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, vote till you get it right. That's the slogan.
Yeah.
We've had and developed the most democratic culture that the Vermont AFL-CIO has ever had. We've put forward a progressive vision. We've switched the resources that we have primarily to helping working people organize, while at the same time building power that's allowed us to win important legislation like the Vermont PRO Act. It facilitates working people being able to organize without the level of harassment that they usually get from their employers. And that's something that nationally, with the strategy pursued by the National AFL-CIO, they've been talking about the Employee Free Choice Act. They've been talking about the PRO Act nationally. And the reality is that lobbying and relying on the Democratic Party has gotten nowhere. In fact, we've looked primarily to the development and the support of a working class-based party, the Progressive Party, in Vermont, which is not to say that we don't also at times support some strongly pro-labor Democrats. So this didn't sit well, this new orientation. It's actually a new strategy, and, the national leadership realizes it's a new strategy. Instead of relying on so-called friendly politicians, we're relying on members and their collective activity and involving them in the decision-making. The result has been a lot of organizing in Vermont. So we've grown dramatically. And we've also taken stances that has made the national uncomfortable, like supporting Black Lives Matter, not just in a resolution, but concretely turning members out, standing up for racial justice, having a perspective of everything we do is about trying to unite working people so that we can develop our power as a class. And we've been remarkably successful in 4 or 5 years in changing that culture and relating to all of the young people now, many of whom are radicalizing and looking to join and build unions, but they don't want to be bossed around by a distant bureaucracy. They want to be the union. They think of themselves as the union. They think as their coworkers as the union, not some distant, office somewhere. So we've been harassed, quite frankly, ever since 2019 by the national leadership of the AFL-CIO because we're pursuing a different strategy. They threatened us in the past, held back funds that were necessary for us to function. Now, after we had, I would say, the most democratic, effectively run election at the largest Vermont AFL-CIO convention in, well, probably at least 25 years, maybe forever. They didn't like the results. So they looked to an opportunity to replace the top key leadership positions with more conservative union leaders who don't put that much of an emphasis on the members, on a member run and a member activity, but rather look much more to lobbying and developing relationships with the Democratic Party politicians. So they've ordered a new election. They didn't like the results. They ordered a new election. It was supposed to be the end of this month. And they've been getting some pushback, though, from us and from other grassroots-oriented trade unionists and allies, not just union members, around the country. And that's getting stronger. And so far, they've actually postponed that election. We don't know until when. I'm sure they're not giving up on replacing the progressive, and I would say, quite frankly, class struggle leadership of the Vermont AFL-CIO that was elected by our members with a more conservative, cautious orientation. So that's what this is about. And we're looking for support around the country. And not just for us. We want to help be part of developing a bottom-up, powerful labor movement that understands that democracy is power. It's not just about your relationships with some politicians in Washington, D.C.
Very powerful. So, can you take me through kind of what the strategy is, in fact, to make that happen? I mean, I'm happy to be a cog in that wheel, a voice, allow you to get the message out. But I mean, do you have buy in and who are you talking with? Who are these groups? What is the strategy, if you will, for making that happen?
Well, we've developed allies around the country. Certainly, even on the leadership level of national unions, there's been disgruntlement on the part of some leaders who understand that the current business union model, relying on democratic politicians, is just leading to the labor movement becoming weaker and weaker. And frankly, people understand the importance of democracy. That's a growing trend within the union movement in this country. I mean, for example, there was a labor notes conference that we attended in Chicago recently. It was 4,700 people who showed up. They're all people who want to develop class struggle unionism, who understand that our labor movement has to be member driven and democratic to the core. The only reason there weren't more people there was that the venue couldn't deal with more people, so they cut off registration a full month before the conference was even held. There are other state federations and central labor councils, as well as, of course, rank and file currents within unions all around the country, and not all of whom are in the AFL-CIO in this country, organized mostly by young people, self-organized, who don't want to be part of a bureaucratic, powerless, dying organization. We have relationships that we're developing. And as the word gets out in the sympathetic labor press and more broadly through podcasts like your own, we're developing, I would say, a strong current that's going to put pressure on the national AFL-CIO. And in our view, we want to help organize that current into something that's in it for the long haul. It's not just about saving a progressive class struggle orientation in Vermont. It's about developing a bottom-up labor movement across this country that can actually deal with the reality that working people, at best, our living standards have stagnated. Things like healthcare costs are totally, I mean, it's just becoming a tragic situation. It's been a tragic situation for a long time. But other issues like there's a climate crisis. Who's going to develop that power? Who has the potential power to meet things like that? The environmental movement, God bless them, but the environmental movement hasn't had the power to do it alone. It's going to take the development of mass organizations that involve people that do education.
Yep.
In other words, a powerful working class movement that'll work with social movements like racial justice movements, pro-immigrant movements. They'll work with environmentalists who understand the need for a truly just transition to deal with climate change, who will actually take a stand around issues like the tragedy
Yes.
that's developed in the Mideast, the Israel's slaughter, quite frankly, of people in Gaza, and the vigilante violence
Genocide.
that's developed in the West Bank. And that's been facilitated by uh, every Democratic and Republican administration since 1948. So, we need a labor movement that's a big picture movement,
Indeed.
that's bottom up, that can develop the power of working people so that we can start to turn things around in this country before it's too late.
I want to read something to you from the article because I find it kind of piggybacks on something you had said a little while ago. It's at the very end of the article, and he says a four-time delegate to the National AFL-CIO conventions and past Labor Council officer, Leyshon remembers when we used to have a hell of a time just getting a quorum for meetings. If foes of the reform in the VSLC make Liz Schuler assisted comeback later this month, no one at the AFL-CIO headquarters will be worried about that problem because, in their view, organizational inaction is better than the progressive dynamism on display in recent years. And this speaks to kind of that neoliberal consensus the uni-party consensus, if you will, of the capital class that runs our country, that runs those parties, and ultimately is the gatekeeper to the golf trips and the five-star dinners of those $300,000 a year union officials that aren't really serving your needs. Let me just rain on this momentarily. I am desperate to see you succeed, okay? I am desperate to see anyone that is resisting this hellscape to build power for the working class and for we the people to get whatever support they need. I'm very powerless to do much of anything other than lend my voice and platform, but even that is insignificant. What you're trying to do is really important, but you have devils in the hen house. The coyotes are guarding the hen house. You're not dealing with a fair deck in your own organization. How do you route out that kind of I don't know what the right word for it is, so I'm just gonna use the word corruption, okay? Because their job is to support you. Your job is to support labor. But it seems like their job is to support candidates, which by extension makes them a part of the Democratic Party. I mean, they're not really part of your union. Their allegiance lies not with the membership, but with the political class. How do you unwedge that? They've gotta have a million rules and stipulations or parliamentarians or some other nonsense to block democratic actions. How do you deal with it for real?
Well, we deal with that by having what I call a rank and file strategy, helping working people raise their expectations, understand the importance of collective action. This should not be you're on your own. It was the kind of the yo-yo culture, you're on your own, and yo-yo economics that dominates this country. I guess you use the term neoliberalism. I mean, that's really all about shifting power to the ruling rich, to the billionaire class in particular.
Privatization, ruling class, all the above. Yes, sir.
We believe in providing trainings for rank and file members. We developed a culture where we stand in solidarity with contract fights and organizing campaigns across Vermont and across the country. We may not win in the court of the executive council and the top current leadership of the national AFL-CIO. We are sure going to try to win. We have allies, even on the executive council, who I believe will stand up and fight with us. But it's mostly the potential power and developing a current that understands the importance of class struggle unionism, that doesn't follow the business union model, which is all about collaboration with the employer class.
Help me understand your vision of class struggle unionism. I've spoken with Joe Burns, who wrote the book on it. I've spoken with David, obviously. I've spoken with Jeff here recently. I've even spoken with Sarah Nelson. I'm curious, what is your definition of class struggle unionism? Because we have people that served in federal unions for government employees, and they think this whole concept of class struggle unionism is pie in the sky by and by. But to me, it is the end game. Without having that, the rest of us who are not necessarily working in places where we have access to unions, we're highly dependent on groups that do have unions, and we're highly dependent on that kindling turning into a raging fire across the country and reinvigorating the strike and reinvigorating labor to not allow what has been going on for the last 40 plus years to continue a minute longer. We're looking at you all and we're saying, hey, you guys, help guide us. We're kind of scattered, atomized singles. You guys are collective power. Help us help you. What do we need to do? So, what does class struggle unionism mean to you?
It means, first of all, that it's the interests of our members and of the working class more generally that we look to. It's not about developing a comfortable relationship with the employer class. That's another strategy. That's another model. It's not about giving member money and supporting the lesser evil politicians who really answer to the billionaire class primarily. And that's certainly true on a national level. So that's why it's difficult. Class struggle unionism is about developing working class solidarity. It's about developing the activity and the vision of working class people. It's about being willing to strike. That's the ultimate power. I mean, that's what capital listens to, is our ability to withhold our labor. Now, in this country, particularly since the Taft-Hartley Act was passed in 1947, most of the really effective things that you can do are illegal, like political strikes, for example. I mean, take, for example, there's a lot of unions, particularly we see that in the more campus-based unions, who would like to engage in political strikes to demand a ceasefire in Palestine and Israel, or political strikes to strengthen the demand for universal health care. Those things are all illegal. The kind of solidarity across unions are illegal. So class struggle unionism is one which says we are about developing the power and changing the relationship of forces so that we can do what's necessary in order to develop workers' power, striking, political strikes if necessary. For example, we anticipated in the last presidential election that Trump would probably lose and that he wouldn't admit that he'd lost. And he's been cultivating a far right movement, some of it armed, and that they were not going to go along with the idea that the majority of Americans voted for the lesser evil and elected Joe Biden. Started to organize for a political strike, for a general strike, if you will, in Vermont. It wasn't just like a resolution that we passed. We were actually organizing for that in the event that something like what happened on January 6th was successful. The National AFL-CIO freaked out. They told us we couldn't even vote on that. They told us that they would put us into receivership if we actually acted on those sorts of things. And we took a stand. We said, okay, we're going to take the risk because the defense of whatever level of democracy exists in this country is something that the working class has an interest in. So we were ready to defy the National AFL-CIO and to defy the laws which say you can't have political strikes. You don't have to really worry about the law as long as you have the power to win. And that's what we're about developing, providing training for rank and file members, to supporting on-call organizers who've helped create workplace unions across the state. We run things we call the worker circles already in 3 cities in Vermont on a regular basis. Anyone can come to those. You don't have to be a union member. In fact, most of the people who come are interested in how do they deal with problems on the job, or how do they deal with problems in their community, or maybe how could they go about organizing a union? So class struggle unionism is about developing solidarity and the power to win and exercising the right to strike, whether it's illegal or not part of the tradition. That's a perspective that the National AFL-CIO has been hostile to, frankly, ever since the National AFL-CIO came together in 1955. And that was only possible after driving out the left-led unions from the CIO.
When I had Sarah Nelson on this program, she made the claim, and apparently she makes it anywhere she goes, that there are no illegal strikes, only unsuccessful ones. And I think that speaks to what you're saying there, in that if you have the power and you're able to wield that power, ultimately the concept of an illegal strike vanishes quickly. What does that power look like manifested?
Well, in her own union, for example, part of the CWA, flight attendants, at a time when Trump administration was engaged in essentially defunding the government from anything and everything that the far right in this country despises, she said, we in our union are ready to take strike action. We can shut down the airline industry. And lo and behold, that wasn't an empty threat. And because it wasn't an empty threat, the Trump administration backed down. So that's an example. Can you imagine what would it take to win universal health care, to actually drag this country into the 20th century, no less the 21st century, to have a healthcare system which was at least as good as universal healthcare systems in the majority of other countries? What would it take? Well, it would probably actually take the development of a working class party or a mass party where, unions, progressive unions would unite with social movements to change things.
I understand the AFL-CIO to be kind of the union of unions. And that I guess the Vermont AFL-CIO is the union of unions for Vermont. What is the AFL-CIO footprint in terms of your version of class struggle unionism, your version of bottom-up union organizing versus more broadly the business unionism that reigns supreme across America today?
Well, our model of unionism basically being on the idea that we need one big effing union. So we don't really care whether people who are organizing an independent union, or they're an independent union like United Electrical Workers, or in Vermont, the NEA, the National Education Association, isn't part of the Vermont AFL-CIO yet. We extend our solidarity and our support for strike action or whatever else is necessary. When the Vermont state employees were facing significant cuts in their healthcare benefits and other class struggle unionism issues that were important to them when they weren't part of the Vermont AFL-CIO. But we helped rally with them to push back, quite frankly, the Democratic Party dominated legislature and the minority Republicans, together with the Progressive Party, which actually has some traction in the state. It's the only really viable third party on a state level in the country, unfortunately. And so we extend our solidarity to people who are in unions that aren't part of the AFL-CIO. We extend our solidarity to Black Lives Matter. We extend our solidarity to environmentalists and environmental action as long as it does not hurt working class people. And there are ways to deal with the climate crisis that do not victimize working class people. The notion of a just transition is a fine notion, but unless there's workers' power to force a just transition, it's not going to happen. And we're never going to meet the climate crisis without that.
Can I jump in on that? I don't want to let that one go. That's an important thing. So, as part of our macroeconomic work, we're trying to bring about knowledge of a job guarantee, which when you listen to Jeff Reisberg, job guarantee was part of that package, very important part of that package. Job guarantee is something that people can jump on and jump off as needed. It's a right to a job. It's a guaranteed job at a living wage. And the macroeconomic impact of that means that nobody would ever have to be unemployed. So as a worker, a striking worker at that, and you would have the opportunity to roll over to the job guarantee as a means of supplementation during a direct action, unless, of course, the government does what it frequently does, which is side with big business and prevent such a thing. But when we think about a Green New Deal, we often talk about a just transition. And within that Green New Deal, the just transition would be those folks working dirty jobs be transitioned and trained and paid a living wage or paid their current wage even to move over into green industry or industries that are no longer harming the planet. Um, what is your idea, your concept of a just transition?
Well, what we really want is a worker-led just transition, a just transition that understands that working class people in this country have been taking it in the chin for a long time, that there's a lot of insecurity out there. People know that their kids are not going to have as good a chance as they had. For example, my first union job, it was whatever it was, 1968. You had the perspective that you were taking a job and you would have it for 30 years or 25 years till you could retire with a decent pension. Well, that's no longer true. People feel insecure. That's why when environmentalists talk about a just transition, people think it's an illusion, that it's not going to happen. And the only way that there can be a just transition that's fair to people who are going to lose their jobs, and it's actually going to have the support of people, maybe they work in the fossil fuel industry. A lot of those are very skilled jobs and they're family wage jobs with decent benefits. There's got to be a real alternative where people are not going to have their families victimized. There's got to be, I think your idea of a full jobs economy where everyone has a right to a decent job. And maybe one of the ways we get there is we have a shorter work week with no loss in pay. It's not an old idea. It's actually done to some degree in some other countries.
I'm boy, dare I say, an advocate or I'm an activist in the macroeconomic space, and I follow a school of thought called modern monetary theory. and work hand in glove with a lot of MMT theorists around the world. And one of the things that frequently, not just unions, but rank and file voters and others get very, I mean, when I say very wrong, I mean they get it really wrong. They're carrying the water for Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher without even realizing it. And that is the concept of they believe it's their tax dollars paying for these things. And they never stop to ask where the first dollar came from, which is from the government. The government created these things by law. This is the government's unit of account. It creates dollars freely, like a Sabaro's Pizzeria giving you a 50% off coupon. They don't need those coupons to spend things. They give them to you for redemption. And that's the same way it is with the US government. So the idea that the US government could not subsidize and even straight up pay for a just transition for those workers that you're talking about, for example. Let's say a certain industry is going to go completely out of business. Let's say it's coal miners. Let's say coal is going to be done away with, period, for whatever reason, forever. The idea that those workers who take great pride in their work and identify as human beings, that they're coal miners, is a tough hill to overcome. However, the ability to pay them a living wage or pay them the wage that they could be paid, it's a complete farce that we can't find the money, that we've got to raise taxes to pay for things. You got the very nice white knight that says, I don't mind paying more in taxes so and so can have XYZ. And it's like, I get it at the state level, at the Vermont level, or at the Maryland level, or the Pennsylvania level. But the federal government literally is the currency issuer. And we have been swept aside and forgotten this for so long. Margaret Thatcher's famous line, that there is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayer money. And therefore, they have used that to great precision to discipline the working class through austerity measures based on we can't pay for it. We can't find the money. We can't afford it. Jeff, who is an avid MMTer as well, he and I, that's one of our deep connections. He is personally trying to bring about knowledge. So is Sarah Nelson. She's worked hand in glove with Stephanie Kelton, who is the leading voice of MMT, at least in the political class in the United States. Have you all ever broached this with your own internal group? I think this is something that would be of such a vital tool to use to say, you can't lie to us anymore. The things you're saying are a lie. During the pandemic, that money that they used to keep people whole, the paychecks that they gave, the payouts that they gave during the pandemic, that was new money. That wasn't taxpayer dollars either.
Mhm.
So if you think about that as a sort of de facto just transition from eliminating dirty jobs or whatever, I mean, this is a tool that I believe the unions, if they internalized it and recognized it, would help making that national effort for class struggle. It would empower it in spades. Believe me when I say this is not a gotcha. You may not even know this stuff. A lot of people don't. That's why we're doing our activist bit. That's why we're out there telling people these things, because they use fear. This is like what the union bosses do. They use fear to make you toe the line. Well, the government and the neoliberal class and the academic class and the new consensus, that DC consensus, they use austerity as a weapon to discipline labor on behalf of the capital class that keeps you desperate and unable to organize your people. So the idea of a job guarantee with a just transition paid for by the federal government, locally administered, democratically administrated at the local level, that right there to me represents real hope and real power. And you add that with your union organizing and your ability to mobilize. My God, the things we could do. Anyway, I just dreaming there, and I wanted to put that little thing in your head there to think about, to consider, and also to get your feedback.
Well, we've actually had some discussions about MMT, what is a modern monetary theory,
Yes, sir.
internally. I mean, as an individual, I'm agnostic, but one can look back on the economic crisis, the financial crisis, the housing crisis of what was it, 2008?
8 and 9, yes.
8 and 9. I mean, when the financial system was threatened,
They bailed out the banks.
both came up with incredible amount of funds to bail out the financial industry. But they didn't bail out homeowners, they didn't bail out working people.
No, they didn't.
So, whether one understands or agrees with MMT, we know that the billionaire class, the powers that be, both the Democratic and the Republican parties, will come up with funds when it's in their interest to do it.
Their class interest.
They just are not willing to actually come up with funds to make things that working people need possible. And my attitude towards MMT and so much else is that until we have the power
Yeah.
to force them to win real concessions, to create a new economic model. I mean, frankly, I'm a socialist, but it would be a step forward if we had a guarantee of jobs for all, livable wage, family wage jobs for all. There was legislation not all that long ago, well, some decades ago, what was the Humphrey Hawkins,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
but the implementation of a full jobs economy, a guaranteed job, we didn't have the power.
We still don't.
We've got to develop it. It's an organizing issue.
Yes. Agreed 100%. I wanna make sure that everybody goes to battle with all the facts, right? When you think about what I'm saying, me and you are simpatico, 100%. I've been trying to tell, even within my MMT space, don't tell me to just go source the vote for a few more progressives. We've already seen that the system's captured by the elites. So we have to have power, period, full stop, end of story. And that's why we need our rank and file to understand, hey, did you know that when they say they don't have the money, they're lying to you? Did you know that when they tell you this stuff is going to bankrupt the nation, they're using that to scare you? Don't let them scare you. Let's unite and fight. Let's rise up and take this shit back. And to me, as a person in this space, and yet not really in your space, I feel like I have to yield the floor and allow you guys to figure it out. But I feel like I need to present this information. And I know that there are people that are actively working in that space, desperately trying to leverage the understanding of MMT to empower labor, to have that unification, to bring about the class struggle, to bring about the answers to the policy cases that are presented as, oh, we could never do that. Wherever will we find the money? Liar. You're finding the money every other day to bomb the kids in Gaza. Don't tell me you don't have the money to make workers whole. Don't tell me that. It's a lie. So to me, at this point in time, I feel like if we're fighting with half the knowledge that we need to fight back against the capital order that is literally putting its foot on the neck of labor, both organized and disorganized labor, we as a working people, as a working class, as socialists, quite frankly, have to understand how this system operates to be able to fight back. And what you guys are doing, I'm so envious of. I mean, the struggle you're in is righteous. Even if you don't win, you have to fight it, right? You have to fight it. And I think the more resolve you show, the more emboldened other workers will be to join you really, truly, not just on the surface, but really materially join in that struggle. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree entirely. There's so much demoralization and disengagement, particularly among working class people and poor people. And that's understandable.
Yes.
A lot of people have totally given up on the political system for good reason.
Yep.
We need to develop the sort of unity and the self-confidence and the vision, which is really only possible through developing collective action. Those are the first steps, in my view, to dealing with things like an economy that works for all,
Yes.
or dealing with the crisis of climate change, or dealing with these wars where so many billions of our dollars go, and they're not going to a good thing. I mean, right now, they're going to what, in my view, is a genocide. So, yes, I do agree. It's about power. It's also about developing a vision and an alternative.
Yes. There was a guy I used to listen to on the radio years ago. He's called the Bible Answer Man. And for anybody that was once a right winger and has moved to the left, or anybody that's still, a person of faith, he always used to say, and I hold on to this, even though I don't share his political views. He said, always have an answer for the hope that lies within. And I think that if you're not part of your own plan, you're going to be part of someone else's plan. You may not like it. What are your thoughts in terms of setting the agenda versus the agenda being set for you all?
Well, that's precisely why our goal is a member-driven labor movement. Our executive board meetings are open to all union members. That's why we increased the number of delegates that could be represented at conventions. That's why fundamentally we just believe in democracy as power. So we reject this really illegitimate, which is what the national leadership is trying to do to us, forcing a revote. It's a sham election with a predetermined outcome. I won't go into the details, but we will stay in this fight. It's not just us in Vermont. It's currents around the country, and particularly among young people that are joining and organizing unions and doing amazing things like the UAW 4811 out in California, who went on what was really implicitly a political strike over the issue of Palestine. They were able to do it as an unfair labor practice strike, which covered them theoretically, uh, with regard to the law. But of course, the boss class and their servants, they don't necessarily follow the law. So they had found some judge who didn't even have the power to impose an injunction, who imposed an injunction. I mean, totally outside of the bounds of what the law says. It's that new generation which gives me hope. It's the allies around the country who've been really fighting for a democratic labor movement, for a class struggle labor movement for years. And this is really the first time, I think, since the early 1970s that we see real hope and the possibility of fundamental change, even if we don't win in this sham election that's being imposed on us sometime whenever it's held in July or something. Even if we don't win on that level, we're not giving up. We're going to be there. We're going to be on the executive board. We're going to be continuing to help organize workers and bring them in and to train people to be active.
Traven, you've been amazing. Obviously, we could have covered a lot more territory if we had days and weeks to talk. But in our tight, confined window here, let's make sure you get your final point out. What would you like everybody to take away? I mean, if we didn't cover it already, what are your parting words?
That change is both possible and necessary within the organized labor movement, which needs to grow and needs to develop power, and it needs to do that by helping its members become more engaged, having the real power through collective action and through strikes when necessary, and through developing a social movement, unionism, that looks out for allies outside of the organized union movement, looks to working with environmentalists who understand the need for a worker-led just transition, or is willing to work with economists and others who can help develop alternative ways of dealing with what is really kind of an ongoing economic crisis that's been in this country for decades and decades, the result being the imposition of vast inequality on the majority of working people. So we're in it for the long haul. We've got allies. We look to people to frankly bombard the headquarters. We'll be sending out messages. People can sign letters to the Executive Council, to President Schuler. But most important, we are part of developing a new revitalized labor movement. And in the long run, we will win because it's necessary.
I love it, man. Do me a favor, send us any links or any necessary backing documentation. We'll include that in our extras for this episode so that others who are interested can go through and jump on board. Take the call to action to heart and maybe write those letters on your behalf.
We will do that, and I want to thank you for your perspective and for giving our voice a chance to reach more people.
You got it, man. I appreciate you so much. Folks, my name's Steve Grumbine. I am the host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. We are a part of another organization that I am the CEO of called Real Progressives, and we are a nonprofit. We are a 501c3, and we live on your donations. Your donations are tax deductible, so please consider becoming a monthly donor at patreon.com/Real Progressives. And you can also go to our website, realprogressives.org, under donate. Go ahead and donate there, please, by all means. No amount is too small. With myself and my guest, Traven, I really appreciate y'all sticking by us. Please take a look in the extras and the transcripts. Also, there is a Tuesday night macro and chill every week. Go to our website and you will be able to find the link. It is a webinar where we discuss these podcasts together, break them down in 15-minute increments, and have a really, really good community building session. Join us this Tuesday night at Macro and Chill. You are all invited. Definitely listen on Saturday mornings to Macro and Cheese. And with that, my name's Steve Grumbine with my guest, Traven Leyshon. We are out of here.